In 1850, gluten sensitivity didn't exist. Not as a diagnosis, not as a symptom, not as a whisper in medical literature. Millions of people across America and Europe ate bread every single day, thick slices of dark, tangy soured dough. Their guts were fine, strong, healthy, no bloating, no brain fog, no inflammatory bowel disease affecting 1 in 100 people. But today, gluten-free is a $7 billion industry. Celiac disease has increased 400% since 1950. An estimated 6% of the population suffers from non-celiac gluten sensitivity, experiencing digestive chaos, joint pain, and neurological symptoms after eating bread. And here's the disturbing part. The wheat hasn't fundamentally changed, but the bread has, completely. In 1820, a baker in colonial Philadelphia made 30 loaves of sourdough per day. Each one required 48 hours from start to finish. He kept a sourdough starter that had been alive for 20 years, fed daily with flour and water. His customers, laborers, farmers, dock workers, gauged this bread as their primary food source. Half a pound per day, sometimes more. And they were robust. Medical records from the period show almost no mention of digestive disorders related to bread consumption. Fast forward to today. Celiac disease, once so rare it was considered a medical curiosity, now affects 1 in 100 people worldwide. Non-celiac gluten sensitivity affects an additional 18 million Americans. Irritable bowel syndrome, strongly linked to gluten consumption, affects 10 to 15% of the global population. Leaky gut syndrome, a condition where the intestinal barrier breaks down, is epidemic, and the medical establishment blames gluten. Your great-great-great-grandfather was a baker who ate sourdough bread daily for 70 years without issue. You eat one sandwich and your gut rebels. So what the hell changed? The answer isn't that gluten suddenly became toxic. The answer is that traditional sourdough fermentation transformed gluten into something digestible, and modern bread production eliminated that transformation entirely. And the 1800s baker who let his dough ferment for 48 hours with wild cultures. He understood something about grain and digestion that modern industrial bakeries deliberately destroyed in the name of speed and profit. Before we go deeper, drop a comment. Have you gone gluten-free because of digestive issues? Okay. Or can you eat sourdough but not regular bread? Let us know, because what you're about to learn will explain why your gut couldn't handle modern bread, and it's not your fault. Walk into any supermarket and pick up a loaf of artisan bread. The label says sourdough, but read the ingredients: enriched wheat flour, water, yeast, soybean oil, sugar, salt. Cultured wheat flour, a lab-created sourdough flavoring, preservatives. This isn't sourdough. It's regular bread with added acid to mimic the tanks of real fermentation. Real 1800 sourdough had 3 ingredients: flour, water, salt, and time. 48 to 72 hours of fermentation. No commercial yeast, no additives. It's just wild lactobacillus and yeast cultures doing what they've done for 6,000 years, transforming grain into digestible food. But modern sourdough is made in 4 to 6 hours. Bakers add commercial yeast to speed rising. They add cultured wheat flour or vinegar to fake the sour taste. There's minimal, actual fermentation. The gluten proteins remain intact, undigested, ready to wreak havoc in your intestines. Here's why that matters. Gluten is a family of proteins, glutens, and gliadins that give dough its elasticity. But gliadins, particularly a fragment called 33-mer, are highly resistant to human digestive enzymes. They pass through your stomach and small intestine largely intact. When they reach your gut lining, it can trigger zonulin release, a protein that opens the tight junctions between intestinal cells. This creates leaky gut. Undigested food particles, bacteria, and toxins leak through the intestinal barrier into your bloodstream. Your immune system recognizes them as invaders and attacks. Chronic inflammation begins. Over time, this leads to autoimmune conditions, food sensitivities, and systemic inflammation that manifests as joint pain, brain fog, skin issues, and fatigue. Traditional sourdough fermentation prevents this. During 48 hours of fermentation, lactobacillus bacteria produce proteolytic enzymes that break down gluten proteins. Studies show that long fermentation can reduce gluten content by 80 to 97%. The 33-mer fragment, the most problematic piece, is destroyed. What remains is a protein structure so gentle that even people with gluten sensitivity can often consume it without symptoms. But your modern bread, the gluten is intact, unfermented, unbroken, hitting your gut at full strength. Then there's the wheat itself. Modern wheat has been bred for higher gluten content to create fluffier bread that rises dramatically. Bakers want strong gluten networks. That's great for texture, but terrible for digestion. The more gluten, the more problematic proteins your gut has to deal with. And when those proteins aren't broken down by fermentation, they cause problems. 1800s wheat varieties heritage strains like Turkey, Red Fife, and Marquise had lower gluten content and different gluten structures. The gliadin proteins were less aggressive. Combined with long fermentation, the bread was gentle on digestion. And the production speed is the final nail in the coffin. Industrial bakeries can't afford 48-hour fermentation. Time is money. So they use fast-acting commercial yeast, dough conditioners, and enzymes to simulate what natural fermentation does. But simulation isn't transformation. The bread rises quickly, bakes quickly, ships quickly, and your gut suffers. The industry created a product that looks like sourdough, tastes vaguely like sourdough, but behaves in your body like unfermented wheat gluten, inflammatory nightmare. Let's talk about what happens to gluten during sourdough fermentation, because this is where modern bread becomes a gut destroyer. Gluten isn't a single molecule. It's a complex network of glutenin and gliadin proteins. When you add water to flour and mix it, these proteins link together, forming elastic strands that trap gas bubbles and create bread structure. This is what makes dough stretchy and bread chewy. But here's the problem. Gliadins contain peptide sequences that human digestive enzymes, pepsin, trypsin, chymotrypsin cannot fully break down. The most notorious is the 33-mer peptide, a 33 amino acid fragment from alpha-gliadin. This peptide survives digestion and reaches the small intestine intact. In people with celiac disease, this 33-mer triggers an autoimmune response. Their immune system attacks the intestinal lining, causing severe damage. But even in people without celiac disease, this peptide can cause problems. Research from the University of Maryland found that gliadin peptides increase zonulin production in everyone, not just celiacs. Zonulin opens the tight junctions in your gut lining, increasing intestinal permeability. This is leaky gut. And while the medical establishment still debates whether leaky gut causes disease or is merely a symptom, the mechanism is clear. Gliadin peptides compromise your intestinal barrier. Undigested proteins, bacterial endotoxins, and other molecules leak into your bloodstream. Your immune system responds. Inflammation becomes chronic. Traditional sourdough fermentation prevents this through enzymatic breakdown. When lactobacillus bacteria produce lactic acid, the pH of the dough drops. This acidic environment activates enzymes called peptidases and proteases naturally present in flour and produced by the bacteria themselves. These enzymes cleave the gluten proteins at specific sites. The long, complex proteins are chopped into shorter peptides. The 33-mer is broken down into smaller fragments that human enzymes can finish digesting. Studies from the University of Naples found that 24-hour sourdough fermentation reduced the 33-mer peptide to undetectable levels. 48 hours. Complete elimination. But here's the critical part. This only happens with long, slow fermentation at the right pH. Commercial yeast fermentation, which takes 90 to 180 minutes. doesn't drop the pH low enough or lasts long enough for significant gluten breakdown. The peptides remain intact. Then there's the microbial diversity. A traditional sourdough starter contains dozens of lactobacillus species L. San Franciscensis, L. bruis, L. plantarum, L. fermentum, with different enzymatic capabilities. This diversity ensures comprehensive protein breakdown. Some species target gliadins, others target glutenins, others target lectins and enzyme inhibitors. Modern commercial yeast is a single strain, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's fast, predictable, and produces consistent results. But it's a monoculture. It doesn't produce the organic acids or enzymes needed for gluten breakdown. The bread rises, but the proteins remain undigested. And let's talk about lectins. These are plant proteins that bind to carbohydrates on the surface of cells. In high concentrations, they can damage the gut lining and interfere with nutrient absorption. Wheat contains a lectin called wheat germ agglutinin, WGA. Studies show that WGA can increase intestinal permeability and trigger inflammatory responses. Sourdough fermentation reduces WGA by 85 to 95% through bacterial enzymatic activity and acid hydrolysis. A study published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry found that bread made with 24-hour sourdough fermentation had lectin levels so low they were considered negligible. Commercial yeast bread, full lectin content, ready to irritate your gut. Phytic acid is another issue. This compound binds to minerals like iron, zinc, magnesium, and calcium, forming insoluble complexes that your body cannot absorb. Eating bread high in phytic acid means you're not getting the minerals the flour contains. Sourdough fermentation activates phytase enzymes that break down phytic acid. Research from Lund University showed that 48-hour fermentation reduced phytic acid by 70 to 90%, liberating minerals for absorption. Your 1800s ancestor eating sourdough was getting more nutrition from the same flour than you get from modern bread. The cumulative effect of all these transformations: gluten breakdown, lectin reduction, phytic acid neutralization. Organic acid production is bread that's gentle on your gut, rich in bioavailable nutrients, and supports rather than destroys your digestive health. In 2011, researchers at the University of Alberta conducted a groundbreaking study. They took people with diagnosed non-celiac gluten sensitivity and gave them bread made with traditional long-fermented sourdough. The bread used modern wheat, but was fermented for 48 hours with a mature sourdough culture. The results: 80% of participants reported no symptoms, no bloating, no brain fog, no digestive distress. The gluten was still technically present, but it had been transformed by fermentation into something their guts could handle. Another study from the University of Naples in Italy focused on celiac patients. This is critical because celiac disease is an autoimmune condition where even tiny amounts of gluten can cause damage. Researchers gave celiac patients bread made from wheat flour fermented for 60 hours with selected lactobacillus strains. Blood tests showed no increase in anti-gliadin antibodies, and intestinal biopsies showed no damage. This doesn't mean celiacs can eat regular bread, but it proves that fermentation can reduce gluten to levels that don't trigger the autoimmune response. Traditional bakers were trying to help celiacs. The disease was unidentified until 1888, but their methods accidentally created bread that was safe for sensitive individuals. A 2018 study published in Applied and Environmental Microbiology analyzed the peptide composition of sourdough bread fermented for different durations. Breads fermented for 4 hours, typical commercial time frame, had high levels of immunogenic peptides, including the 33-mer. Breads fermented for 24 hours had dramatically reduced levels. Breads fermented for 48 hours had undetectable levels. Today, functional medicine practitioners are prescribing traditional sourdough to patients with gluten sensitivity. Gastroenterologists in Europe, where real sourdough is more common, report that many IBS patients can tolerate authentic, long-fermented sourdough, even when they react to regular bread. And here's the most compelling real-world evidence. Countries that maintain sourdough traditions: Germany, parts of Italy. Eastern Europe have lower rates of celiac disease and gluten sensitivity compared to countries that switched entirely to commercial yeast bread like the United States and UK. A 2015 epidemiological study found that regions of Germany where traditional sourdough rye bread remained a staple had 60% lower rates of newly diagnosed celiac disease compared to regions that adopted industrial bread. This isn't genetics. Germans haven't evolved differently in 50 years. It's the bread. The destruction of sourdough began in the 1870s with the introduction of commercial yeast. Before that, bakers had no choice but to use sourdough starters. It was the only leavening agent available. But in 1868, the Fleischmann brothers in Cincinnati began mass-producing compressed yeast cakes. For the first time, bakers could skip the days-long process of maintaining starters and fermenting dough. Add yeast, wait 90 minutes, bake. Production time dropped from 48 hours to 3 hours. Output increased tenfold. Profits soared. By 1900, commercial yeast dominated urban bakeries. Sourdough survived primarily in rural areas and among home bakers who maintained family starters. But even that began to fade. The final blow came in the 1960s with the Corley wood bread process, developed in the UK. This method used high-speed mechanical mixing, chemical dough improvers, and large amounts of yeast to produce bread in under 2 hours, from flour to finished loaf. No fermentation, no flavor development, no enzyme activity. Just fast, cheap, uniform bread. This became the global standard. By 1980, 80% of bread consumed in developed countries was made this way. Sourdough became a rarity, found only in specialty bakeries charging premium prices, and the health consequences appeared gradually. Celiac disease, identified in 1888, remained extremely rare until the 1950s. Then it began rising. 1 in 10,000 in 1950, 1 in 5,000 in 1970. 1 in 1,000 in 1990, 1 in 100 by 2020, a 400% increase in 70 years. Non-celiac gluten sensitivity wasn't even recognized as a condition until the 1980s. Now it affects 18 million Americans. Irritable bowel syndrome, leaky gut syndrome. Inflammatory bowel disease skyrocketed precisely as sourdough disappeared and fast-fermented industrial bread took over. The timeline is undeniable. For 6,000 years, humans ate fermented bread without widespread gluten problems. For 50 years, we've eaten unfermented industrial bread, and gluten issues have exploded. The food industry blames the victims. You have a gluten intolerance. You need to go gluten-free. They've created a $7 billion gluten-free industry to solve a problem they created. But here's what they don't tell you. The problem isn't gluten. It's unfermented gluten. It's gluten that hasn't been predigested by bacteria. It's bread made in 90 minutes instead of 48 hours. Real sourdough, made the 1800s way, doesn't cause these problems. But real sourdough is slow. Real sourdough requires skill. Real sourdough can't be produced at industrial scale with acceptable profit margins. So they sell you fast bread that destroys your gut, then sell you gluten-free products, softened, more processed, more expensive, less nutritious to fix the damage. It's a perfect business model built on dietary destruction. If you want bread that doesn't destroy your gut, you have 3 options. First, find a bakery that makes authentic sourdough with long fermentation. Look for these markers: naturally leavened, no commercial yeast. Minimum 24-hour fermentation, 48 hours is better. Simple ingredients: flour, water, salt only, and the baker should be able to tell you about their starter. Real sourdough costs more, $8 to $15 per loaf, but you're paying for time and transformation, not just ingredients. Second, make your own. Creating a sourdough starter takes 5 to 7 days, but once established, it's incredibly forgiving. Feed it weekly. Keep it in your fridge and use it to make bread whenever you want. Mix flour, water, salt, and starter. Let it ferment 24 to 48 hours. Shape it, bake it. Hundreds of online tutorials exist. Your 1800s ancestors did this without the internet. Third, if you're highly sensitive, eliminate bread temporarily while you heal your gut. 3 to 6 months of strict avoidance can allow your intestinal lining to repair. Then reintroduce authentic, long-fermented sourdough and see how your body responds. Many people find they can tolerate real sourdough even after years of avoiding bread. The point isn't to obsess over bread. The point is to understand that fermentation transforms gluten from an inflammatory trigger into a digestible protein. If you're tired of being blamed for food sensitivities that modern processing created, hit that like button and subscribe. We're exposing the truth about why traditional food worked and modern food doesn't.